Hi, welcome to Fiber Focus, the podcast where we dive into the world of fiber optics and all things connectivity. Thank you for joining us today. We are here with Loren Rapp, the product line manager for fiber optic cable at Sumitomo Electric Lightwave. Hi, Loren.
Hi, Meredith. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Really glad you're here. What are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about the evolution of cable designs.
All right, so cable designs have certainly evolved. What time period are we going to start with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's start at the beginning with the first design, which was called loose tube cable. This came about in the 1970s, early 1970s, as the need for bandwidth going across the oceans and across the country became prevalent, especially in the telecom space, to accommodate all of the telephone fax, all of that kind of thing. So loose tube cable designs were developed, and basically for fiber optic cables, the fiber in a loose tube cable is surrounded by a little bit of plastic, then some reinforcement elements so that when cables are installed, whether it's by, when we're talking about oceanic cable lines, whether it's by a boat or but just being pulled by hand from building to building, there's some tensile strength to help the cable and the fiber not snap. So that's kind of the first iteration of fiber optic cable is a loose tube design. That's what we call it. And kind of transitioning from that as fiber optics became more prevalent inside of a business or an office. These cables and fibers needed to be terminated to something active to transmit that data inside the building. So another design, kind of similar to loose tube, but another design was introduced called tight buffer cable, where the fibers are coated with additional protection, the individual fibers, so that when they are being spliced, they have some protection against breaking forces, things of that nature, when being spliced onto active equipment. So those tight buffer cables have a 900 micron additional coating onto the fibers that are inside of those cables. And a little while after, so that was mid-70s, I believe, sometime later in the 70s, early 80s, we saw an evolution to central tube cables. And most central tube cables used a new form of holding fibers together called ribbonizing. I'm sure you haven't heard of ribbonizing before. And some of our listeners may not have heard of ribbonized fibers either. So let me go ahead and describe. So typically in your loose tube and tight buffer designs, you're talking about just single fibers within the inside profile of this cable. And when we're looking at that, the way the cables are designed, there's a lot of loose space in between the fibers that is not taken advantage of. And as the need for telecom and computing became prevalent in the 80s as well, customers needed a lot more bandwidth. And they needed a lot more fiber in the same space that these tight buffer and loose tube cables were providing. So how do you do that? That's when ribbonizing fibers became prevalent. So we're taking those single fibers we talked about and joining them or gluing them together. The most common footprint is joining 12 fibers together to join and make a 12 fiber ribbon. So 12 fiber ribbons are commonly found in what we call central tube designs. That way you can stack up to, let's use 144 as a magic number example. You can stack 12 fiber ribbons together neatly into a stack and have the same footprint as a like a 96 or 72 fiber loose tube cable would. So you're seeing that maximization of fiber within the same cable space. And that becomes very important when we're seeing extra demands being put on a business, rather than having to tear up all of their infrastructure, in the ground for duct banks, things like that, to expand the duct banks. Rather than do that, they just want to rip and replace cables out that can accommodate the fiber rather than just changing their whole infrastructure physically.
Gotcha. So it sounds like the cable designs are evolving for the environments in which they need to be
Absolutely.
laid. And so it was about the design changed from, or not changed, but we started off with the loose tube. We will go with the indoor 900 micron cables that also had a different jacket rating, right? Because it's designed for indoor as opposed to
Yes.
outdoor. Then we go to ribbon to get the higher capacity. Is that also related to like conduit space, like available conduit space?
Yes.
Like, what are some of the other drivers of the cable design evolution?
Yes, conduit space is probably one of the number one drivers, especially in today's market. But as we saw, bandwidth and the need for fiber just become more prevalent over the years. The space in the conduit can only fit so much. If you're having a duct space below ground of 4 inches, like I said, you don't want to have to dig all that piping up, that ducting up, and redo it. It's going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars. The easiest, quickest way to do that with less disruption to your business would be to replace the cable that's inside with something that can hold a lot more fiber. So the conduit space, as you mentioned, is probably the most concerning thing for a business to get that additional cable design in. Similarly, there are what is called ladder rack spaces in data centers, so above the room spaces that inside plant cables or your tight buffer cables, some central tube cables for inside use are stored in. So as you can imagine, as bandwidth and capacity issues become more prevalent and more cables are put into those racks, it gets really heavy and you're compromising the integrity of maybe the little cables or cords that are at the bottom of that stack. So if we're able to replace cables that are more lightweight but still have the same fiber, that's the optimal solution.
I was thinking about how, in the 70s, the high fiber count cables were the undersea, right, going across continents. And now I don't know what the numbers would be, but that's what we're seeing like within a data center or from data center to data center, and how very quickly that change has happened.
Yes, absolutely. And you can go even in a much deeper dive as it relates to utilizing the cable to its fullest capacity. There's division wave multiplexing that will actually use the different wavelengths of one fiber, the different colors, to transmit to different areas. We are seeing manufacturers of fiber go into multicore fiber solutions so that you can have let's say a traditional 1728 fiber cable with single cores. You can just replace that with multiple core cables, and now you have if it's a 4-core fiber that's installed, you're increasing that capacity, although it's 1,728 fibers in there. There are 4 cores in each fiber, and you can use each core. So yes, there are different things even beyond cable designs that are being changed and evolving to accommodate today's atmosphere. I mean, AI is definitely a driver. Machine learning is a driver. So we're just trying to keep up.
Absolutely, and doing a good job at it. Are there any other special environments where people might not know that cables have been designed that are, uniquely able to solve the challenges of certain deployments?
Yeah, so I would say for some inside plant cables and cables that we call outdoor indoor that can transition right from the outside and be spliced right to the inside rack without having to do the 50-foot transition splice. You can just bring that cable right in. There are what we're calling monotube cables that have a lower profile. They're very simply designed with just a jacket, the tensile strength elements like fiberglass reinforced plastic that help that pulling strength when installing, and then the fiber inside. So we're decreasing the amount of material within that cable. And to do so, we've had to kind of create a new term and all of that kind of thing. So just very exciting, and it's hard to keep up with all the designs out there, from monotube cables, microduct cable solutions, interconnect cordage, slotted core cables, ribbon and loose tube. It goes on and on and on.
And that's just what we know about now. And as customers come to us with their challenges, I'm sure it'll continue to evolve.
Yes, it'll definitely evolve, especially with the evolution of not only multicore fibers that we talked about earlier, but also the fiber size. Another challenge is we need to make the fiber size a little bit smaller to accommodate some of these high-paced demands that the customer's coming to us for. To get into that space and then live in limited duct banks, we have to have a smaller fiber size. So there are many ways to customize a cable. I can't even compute the number of combinations that there are at this time.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the excellent work that you do for Sumitomo Electric Lightwave and for the industry. And thank you all for joining us today at Fiber Focus, the podcast focusing on all of the things related to the industry and connectivity. We hope that you'll join us again. Share this episode, subscribe, and follow us on the socials. We have a presence on LinkedIn and X. Thanks again, Loren.
Thank you.